Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm creating one of my spinner shaker cards using the Fairy Tale Friends stamp set from My Favorite Things. I started out with a really large piece of Canson watercolor paper taped down to my surface. This piece of paper is cut to be 8 by 8, but I am going to be cutting it down eventually to 6 by 6. I blended onto this panel with some Distress Oxide inks in the colors Mustard Seed, Dried Marigold, Worn Lipstick, Spun Sugar, Tumbled Glass, and Peacock Feathers. I wanted this background to look like a really dreamy sky, and I really love the way that all these colors ended up looking together. After I added all of the colors once, I went back through and added them all again, and this gave me a really nice blend, and it deepened up those colors a little bit. Next, I took out the cloud stencil from My Favorite Things, and using some Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment ink, I'm going to blend across the top edge of that stencil to create some really subtle looking clouds on the background. Because this is such a large piece of paper, that stencil does not fit all the way across, especially in the middle. So in order to get all the way across in those areas, I would blend along one side with the stencil, and then I would flip the stencil over and line up the edge, and then I'd blend the rest of the way across. After finishing those clouds, I took a tiny paintbrush and I dipped it into some clean water, and then I just tapped that paintbrush while hovering over the top of the panel, and this gets me some really tiny little water droplets on that panel. And then I soaked up those water droplets with a paper towel, and that pulls up some of that Distress Oxide ink in those areas. Next, I took a bottle of Aqua pigment paint from Brutus Monroe, and this is the color Pearl, which is a really pretty shimmery white pearlescent color, and I put a little bit of that into a palette, and then I tapped some of that onto the background as well. I let this panel completely dry, and then I cut it down to be 6 by 6, and as I turn it in the light, you can really see those pearlescent drops. I took out the Fairy Tale Friends stamp set from My Favorite Things, and I'm stamping one of the unicorns and the rainbow from that set onto some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock with Gina K Designs Jet Black Amalgam ink. I colored in both of these images using my Copic markers, and I hate to say this, but up until this point in the coloring, I didn't realize that my camera was not on. But on the plus side, all of the coloring up until this point was fairly simple, so I'm just going to walk you through it. So on the rainbow, I actually didn't do any shading. I just filled in all of those bows with the different colors. If you want to know the colors that I used for the rainbow, I'm going to put them up on the screen for you right now. And as for the clouds on the rainbow, I just took that R20 blush color and I added some of that on the underside of the clouds following the line. Alright, now onto the unicorn. The first thing that I did for the unicorn is I took the color E00 and I added some shading to the body of the unicorn, which I want to look white. Next, I colored the mane and the tail using the colors R20 and R43, and I made sure to leave a little bit of white in the center of the hair so that I could have a really, really nice highlight. So now you're caught up to the point where I started filming again, and if you want to know all of the colors that I used at that point, I do have the marker caps off to the side. Okay, so here's the background that I created earlier, and I very, very quickly created a second background to look like that one, and then I cut a ring out of that background using the Hero Arts Nested Circle die set. And I can use the remaining parts of that background for a second card later. I took that same die set and I cut 2 rings out of some white cardstock, and on one of them I very roughly blended some of the colors that are on the background, and I'm going to glue that on top of that other ring to create a nice thick piece. I also cut a ring out of some thick plastic, and this is going to be my spinner element. And finally, I took one of those circle dies and I cut a piece of acetate for the window of my shaker. I took that thick ring that I created and I added some Gina K Designs Connect glue to the back of it, and then I adhered it to the center of that background panel. I then used that same liquid adhesive in order to glue the acetate circle to the back of the blended frame. I cut a really thin piece of doubled up foam tape, and then I used that ring that I have on my background as a guide for placing that foam tape in a circle onto my panel. I took the spinner ring and I placed it so that it goes around that circle. You want to make sure that that foam tape circle is not too tight up against the edge of that spinner element. The sequins that I picked out for this shaker come from Lucy's Cards. This is the Coconut Ice Sequin Mix. Once I had a good amount of those sequins, I closed up the shaker with the window, and this also encloses that spinner ring. I cut out both of my colored in images using my scan and cut, and then I adhered the rainbow to the center of my shaker and the unicorn to the outside edge of that spinner ring. My whole idea for this card came from thinking about cows jumping over the moon, and instead I was thinking, what if a unicorn was jumping over the rainbow? For the sentiment on my card, I picked out one of the stamps from the set, and I used my Misti door in order to curve it so that it fits around that shaker frame. I stamped that sentiment with Versamark ink, and then I embossed it with alabaster white embossing powder. Now, I do want to say that if you're going to do a sentiment like this, you probably want to do it before assembling your shaker, but I didn't realize that this was how I wanted to do it up until this point. So because of that, I had to do this very carefully. The first thing that I had to make sure I did was take the foam pad out of my Misti so that I could stamp this properly. And as you can see, I did have some of that embossing powder stick to the plastic, so I just used a paintbrush in order to wipe that away. And then finally, I had to be very careful with that heat tool while I was heating up the embossing powder because I do have a lot of plastic around that sentiment that I don't want to warp. I thought that the unicorn looked a little bit lonely on that spinner, so I decided to cut a bunch of clouds out of white cardstock and vellum, and then I also cut a bunch of stars out of glitter white cardstock, and I glued those around the spinner as well. And I just used my tweezers and my jewel picker in order to help place those. I decided to adhere this panel onto a card base with foam tape. I just thought that that would make it nice and sturdy. For the finishing touches on this card, the first thing that I did was I took my white gel pen and I added some dashed lines around the shaker frame, connecting both sides of that sentiment. I then took my Spectrum Noir clear glitter brush and I added some glitter to the wings on the unicorn, the horn on the unicorn, and the rainbow. You know me, if there are rainbows and unicorns, there has got to be lots of sparkle. Finally, the last thing that I did to finish up this card is I took that same white gel pen and I added some dashed lines around the edge of the border. Here's a closer look at the finished card, and you can see that spinner in action. I really love the way that this card turned out. This one's really special to me. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed this spinner card design. All of the supplies that I used to create this card can be found in the description down below. And remember that anytime you use one of those links, you're helping to support this channel at no extra cost to you. If you enjoyed watching today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I do new videos every single week, and I'm going to be back with another one really soon. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.